Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's really a great pleasure, a pleasure to have Changsong Zhou here today again after many visits in the past. Changsong, as probably most of you know, is a professor at Hong Kong Baptist University, where he also heads the Department of Physics. He's the director of the Center for Nonlinear Studies, deputy director of the Institute for Computational and Theoretical Studies, as well as director of the Life Science Imaging Center. So that keeps him very busy already, but he still is extremely productive and coming up with new and original ideas in the field of computational neuroscience all the time. Just as a way of background introducing, so Changsong actually obtained his PhD at Nankai University as a theoretical physicist, and then worked as a postdoc fellow at the National University of Singapore, and then also had a stint at Hong Kong Baptist University already, before coming over to Germany to work with Jürgen Kurz at Potsdam, still as a theoretical physicist, working on complex systems and exploring the dynamics of complex systems. And then becoming interested, and that's an interesting story, in computational neuroscience and in large-scale computational models. And in fact, he pioneered the large-scale computational modeling of connectivity structure and functional connectivity. And in fact, his model was the very first one, before the ones of Deco and Zhou and so on, to really represent a whole connectome, that of the cat, and to show what kind of properties for the functional connectivity can be derived from that. So that really was pioneering work. And in general, whenever I have the chance of talking with you, Changsong, it's been greatly inspiring. It's been very stimulating. So he's one of the original and pioneering thinkers in the field of computational neuroscience, where he's authored more than 150 papers, all in all, regularly publishing in the top journals, PNAS and PRL and Neuron and iScience and so on and so on. And it's really fantastic that we have a chance to welcome you here again. And we're very much looking forward to your presentation, which today is entitled Cost-Efficient Neurodynamics and Excitation-Inhibition Balanced Neural Networks at Criticality. So welcome again, Changsong.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl, for all these kind words. And actually, the work you mentioned, it's our first collaboration since like indeed in the connectivity workshop in Shanghai, Fudan, and then I moderate this talk by Professor Feng Jianfeng, simulate 86 billion neuron. I kind of remarked like start from us like 20 years ago, we started the model, but there was a period that we don't know how to go forward and how to use the model. Now people come back, and now I'm now the follower, and I have to follow them to come back to the large scale model again. So it was like interesting. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm so happy to come back after this long period of broke out. And then today I thought to share with you the work in this title is accumulated from this period, and it's a modeling work, but showing that many features of our neural dynamic in the spontaneous or evoked states can be unified by a very genetic model like Li Dong is also using, especially working at the criticality. So I hope that you will see that this model could be useful for further study. So because this EI balance and avalanche seems like two kind of separate parallel paths in the theoretical or experimental neuroscience. And I think after we kind of found kind of unification, so we wrote a review paper summarizing these two fields together. So if you're interested, you can look at that article. Let me see. Okay. Now, before I go to this particular topic, and Klaus mentioned, first I try to put this work in a bit like a more broader context. Like our group has been interested in understanding this neuron dynamic complexity, because you see the key challenge or key core interest in neuroscience is to study how this dynamic lead to function and the behavior. But typically we consider like how stimuli induce like a behavior output. Internally now people are talking about like a representation, right? But inside the brain we have a very complex like activity and intrinsic brain states, and there was a kind of estimate that this will cost 95% of our energy, which is only 20 watts. I will emphasize it's a very, very valuable energy, but we spend most of them on here. So I think in the neuroscience field, especially the quantitative neuroscience field, very typically we don't understand very well this dynamic, and we very often treat them as kind of a noise or background noise. And so I think for people like us from a physics background, we have a strong interest to better understand this dynamic mechanism and how they are related to information processing. That's the kind of overall interest of our work. Basically, all of my work is kind of under this kind of theme, okay? Then the idea here is like people like us from physics, statistical physics, we have this concept of a complex system. But here I want to emphasize like brain is a functional dynamical complex system, right? Complex system have a few ingredients, like neuron is highly nonlinear. When you have a few nonlinear elements coupled, you can already have complex activity like a chaos. But if you have a large number, like in the brain you have billions of neurons, then it is naturally characterized by this so-called emergency of a network activity from a single element, and then they are different. So we know that later we will emphasize that single neuron firing is irregular, but the network can have an avalanche, oscillation, and so on. And then another thing in the last years we emphasize is another access is the fairly complex connectivity. Yeah, and the other day, I think in our meeting last week, before I came to Germany, we had a computational neuroscience meeting. We invited many people come. They emphasize on not only connectivity, neuron type. Yeah, this neuron has a very diverse type, and it means the individual has a lot of heterogeneity. So this is a kind of a complexity we are facing, and then, but on the other hand, such huge network use only little energy of 20 watts. It's amazing. But if you look at this GPT, I think there was some data even further to show training a network is not big like here, this one. This number of parameter now is much, much larger. The energy cost of this kind of training is the whole lifetime of a US car, many of them, 6 of, like 7 of them. So it's a huge energy. So apart from the dynamic, for a long time, we had this kind of concept, like in the neural system is a trade-off of the low cost and the efficient function. The low cost means you need to put a constraint on our network. For example, those property we observe like a wiring, just extend to the neighborhood, you have modules and the small world. It is designed for function, certainly, but at the same time also satisfy this wiring, minimal wiring request. And today we don't just talk about this spatial learning, and you have a spatial network. I think from one side, because the outside of the world is a spatial, and then this network can help you to do the processing, but on the other hand, it is also cost effective. And then dynamic aspect, the firing of the neuron is very sparse. The synaptic coupling is very transient, just a millisecond, right? It's not like the oscillator couple all the time and you have all the energy, but it's very transient. You also have plasticity, like short-term plasticity, even like if you have a neurotransmitter released and then you stop releasing, and even save energy, you can consider in this way. But all those design is, on the other hand, is for the function. The network you build should be efficient for information processing. The dynamic you build, very irregular sparsing, but sparse firing, but you still want to have a sensitive response or coherent firing in the response to external world, right? So, and this kind of economical structure and economical dynamic, they should go with each other. because we have a plasticity. They must be working together, otherwise this structure may be lost. Yeah, a dynamic may be lost. And then this is something intuitive, but I think it's very important for us to understand the neurobiological and dynamical mechanism of the structure, dynamic function relationship in the brain. And nowadays we talk about brain-inspired computing or computer hardware. Then you really hope to learn from the brain to use such a little energy to advance the function. So earlier with like also including clouds, highlight, you mentioned highlight. So we talk about the structurally how this wiring can kind of satisfy the wiring cost and also for the propagation efficiency. And later we go further to show that the metabolic supply to the brain area, those important area need more supply, but the risk is also you produce more waste and put your brain in the risk. So we found that the simple idea I asked Kylan to demonstrate is then important area you need to be more optimized. From one side, you can save much more. Something expensive, if we have discount, we save a lot, right? And also you can avoid this kind of a risk of the waste. And we did find that for the human brain in this work, so those important brain areas seems the wiring is much more optimized than the other areas. So, but today I'm going to talk about is the other side, is the dynamic. We have a model, and actually now I will list more paper to show that this kind of dynamic, as we observe in the real system very often, irregular spiking of a single neuron, avalanche, and oscillation can satisfy this kind of cost efficiency purpose. That is the main talk of today. And about the motivation to study this kind of dynamic, I think nowadays I mentioned that we come back to this so-called digital twin or virtual brain, large scale brain model. You need to have a local circuit model and then coupling between them and so on. So basically, now you also need to consider a heterogeneous local circuit and parameter. I found that sometimes class we are too slow. 2005 when I was here, we discussed how to develop this heterogeneous area coupled with a network to explain functional connectivity. This is now all the top paper published in the last few years. We don't work on that. 20 years ago, we already have the idea how to do, but we didn't work out. And we always like thought earlier, but then we become follower. I found it frustrated. I mean, that's why I said frustrated with Highlander's work delayed. And but now the point is that we need to find a way to more precisely capture important features of this dynamic, I think, because those so-called digital modeling 86 billion neuron, but you don't have any parameter you really know for those neuron connectivity. I don't understand why they do that, but it's fancy, maybe it sounds. On the other hand, some of this virtual brain, like a dynamic model, we kind of come with a neural mass model and try to calibrate it. So my question is whether we have something like in between, maybe we have a better model to capture all those important feature of dynamic. Then this model may give us a better prediction. For example, if you want to do brain computer interface, stimulating certain brain area, that you can perhaps know how to use the brain internal dynamic plasticity, because all those plasticity depending on the dynamic, whether your prediction can be more precise. And then, so overall, I think people like us from physics, we see the brain study actually put a lot of challenges to like statistical physics, system science, big data, because it's a multi-level, so many levels. In physics, we call long equilibrium, highly variable the activity, and very heterogeneous. We see these neuron type regions, and network connectivity is also not homogeneous. And we talk about the hierarchical module, many modules, and each module adding to this huge network, but it's not uniform, means every level is kind of finite size with a lot of variability. But the neural system is trying to use this kind of variability. And the function level, you have many like function can do many functions, and you need the ability to segregate and integrate also dynamically and balance. So we have worked on this kind of segregation integration since the beginning with Gorka. I think we ask, give you a network, how can you do this specialized, but at the same time integrate how to achieve balance, kind of optimization, cost effectiveness or functional requirement, multifunction, individual difference. You still allow strong individual difference, but then extreme case, you go to disease and disorder, right? So I think there's a very big gap of a lot of data collecting and more data, but understanding between this kind of dynamical or biological complexity and like using some complex system understanding of the brain, still there's very big gap. But this means we have a lot of opportunities, right? Every one of us, like we can work for 20 years, no worry, or more longer, hundreds of years. Okay, so basically I just kind of wrap up for my group, and we've been doing this analysis and modeling of complex brain network, variable neuron dynamic, focusing on this from structure, dynamic function, behavior relationship, and develop some kind of method. Now we also use a lot of machine learning. And then we are now moving to also using this idea to neural modulation strategy that is a fellowship given to me starting from this year. So basically what our focus is try to treat this kind of variable dynamic as reflecting this network organized dynamical property like reflecting the brain states and influencing our information processing. So we work on this like a local neural circuit or network, and then go to integrate with data and even go to individual difference. So like I see Klaus already go very much deeper into neuroscience, like you're talking about memory engram. So I'm still kind of wondering at this general like a dynamical property, but I found it interesting. They are quite important or interesting organization. For example, today I'm going to talk about multi-level dynamic systems can be unified, but you have a lot of like waves and these kind of critical states locally and globally, heterogeneous, cost efficiency, and then we talk about this overall brain functional segregation integration, many levels of modular architecture, and then even close individual, you have balance of the segregation integration for function. And so this is our work, and recently we also established a life science imaging center in our university with very typical, I would say, typical like MRI, EEG, and TMS, and FNE. So our university we interested in this interdisciplinary brain study like art and decision making like that, or some Chinese medicine and healthy. Yeah. So now this is a kind of recap and about what we've been doing. And then now let me come to this today's talk. First, I will show you some features we found very important, interesting, like in spontaneous and evoked brain states. Then I will show you that the model, which is a very generic local circular model, can co-organize a multi-level spontaneous dynamic and explain a lot of features in evoked states, but especially at critical state. And then I can show you that this model and demonstrate that the neural system found out that you can use less cost to generate this type of useful dynamic states. And if we have time and if you don't mind for long, I can show you a bit like some application of this model, like to neural modulation, right? So neuron dynamic, I think colleagues have been working on this for a long time. So I think we don't have to be very detailed, but to emphasize that the single neuron recording showing that the spiking interval of the neuron is very similar to Poisson process. This CV is the, I think, average divided by, or standard deviation divided by mean for a Poisson random process equal to 1. But then for the data is around 1, but actually sometimes can be bursty, but sometimes can be a bit periodic. But overall, the spiking of a neuron is very irregular. So how this kind of irregular spiking can come, this is, I think, a very important advance is Somoplinsky. I think he got some prize or the last year. Statistical physicist showing that computational neuroscience really can push the field forward. His idea basically from the observation, we have a excitatory and inhibitory population. The current from the excitatory population is positive and the inhibitory population negative. If it is balanced, then this neuron sitting here is just receiving some kind of residual noise, and then your spike is irregular. And a self-consistent consideration is if you have a sparse network, it is coupled. And the nature spends so much effort to create this neuron. But eventually, this model said that after you couple them, every neuron spiking is independent, irregular. Then for what? It's amazing, right? Then this, okay, after you see that, only the firing rate is important for coding information and so on. So this EI balance seems to be an important feature of the cortical circuit, because you see that it is demonstrated in many cases. So for a long time, people will say our brain should be asynchronous state. And if you see some correlation, this paper especially theoretically show that that correlation is a finite size effect. If you go to larger system, nothing. Yeah, it's a preferred, but it's not true, I think, because you really see this is a kind of correlated spiking of many neurons in the retinal or in the cortical culture, and then pairwise correlation is really very little, but even that little pairwise correlation can generate a highly correlated spiking of many neurons together, and then the input current is not like this. The current is you have kind of a structure or oscillation in this current, and it is cancelled largely. And you also can see in this recording, the excitation will come and then the inhibition will follow, but a bit later. Yeah, you have some delay. So, and then because of this correlation, if there's no correlation, then you cannot have this so-called avalanche. If you have correlation, you will see that this spiking of the neuron form can propagate in such a correlated way, like an avalanche. And then the duration of this avalanche and the size, the total size, or how many neuron or how many spike, this is called avalanche. They have a kind of a power law distribution. Yeah, a power law just written here. The size is a power law distribution, time is a power law distribution, size as an average size as a function of the interval is also a power law function. And all this exponent has a relationship here. This kind of a relationship, alpha minus 1, tau minus 1, equal to this exponent. And this is from statistical physics critical system saying that this exponent will satisfy this relationship because the kind of a universal class is this value. From where? From, I will emphasize later, this model capture this kind of avalanche is like a coffee spreading. When one neuron get excited and downstream, you also activate on average one neuron, then this is a critical state. If it less than one, this activity will die out, or larger than one, like a disease will spread to the whole population, right? But the experimental measurement to show that this tau, this alpha, is supposed to be here, is not actually. Many measurements to show that this tau and alpha can change, but this line relationship here seems to hold for different samples, different data. So it is a critical state, but it's not such a universal class. And actually, people already found that if you have a model, it's similar to what Li Dong doing, maybe a local circuit with excitatory inhibitory population, then you can put the model to kind of critical, closer to critical regime, then this exponent may not follow this one. Yeah, may not follow this one. And then this EI balance, amazing thing in the EI balance is like this. When you have an input to the circuit, and then you can see that the current may be larger in the excitatory or inhibited population, but they are always balanced. They are balanced in even when you have an input. So this is was somewhat like predicted in the original EI balance model, saying that the response rate is proportional to the external rate, but the system is at the balanced state, right? And then another thing about the avalanche is in the literature, they found in the experiment that in a resting state or kind of this third, I think it's third brain, when it is at the resting state, the activity is this kind of power law, and it's avalanche, and then put the visual signal to the animal. Then in the very beginning, the activity was kicked away and become super critical. But after a period of time, still have this visual signal, then you relax back to this power law, relax back to the power law. So it seems to show that in the resting or in the both states, it's still needed. A bit warm. Our brain kind of a critical state seems a kind of a working state of our brain. Yeah, and then theoretically earlier research already put the kind of plasticity into model in order to explain this kind of we call self-organized criticality. So you come back to stay at the critical state, right? But I will show you that in our model, we do not need to immediately put the plasticity because the E and I balance is very adaptive. You can maintain in this kind of critical state. So theoretically, when the brain is at the critical state, that's very nice because these could provide us the states like very sensitive to external perturbation, and we can adapt to environment. For example, the so-called dynamic range means the circuit can produce measurable kind of response to a very minimal input or a maximal input. If larger, then you don't have discrimination. It's in this range and small and larger stimuli, you can have a proper response. So this kind of dynamic range is maximized at the critical state. So this is the circuit. If you put a drug to make it over-excited or over-inhibit, you always reduce this dynamic range. Or the entropy, when we measure put different electrode to measure this avalanche at different places, they can, in principle, be used as information representation, because that could produce, for example, downstream like a motor action and so on. So if you treat that kind of pattern as an information entropy, then it is a maximal at the critical state. And another property, people talk a lot about the sequencing in the neuron population. We need a certain degree of sequencing for integration, but it should not be too strong and rigid. So the neuron population is like synchronized, desynchronized. So this kind of variability, we found that it's at maximal at the critical state, this kind of. So later I will emphasize that these all provide kind of flexibility. And later we will ask how we can achieve at the same time reliability. And my model can also achieve kind of reliable response. Now, very often we talk about this brain wave or neural oscillation. This year, EEG, 100 years EEG, right? Starting from the first day, people found is a wave, yeah, EEG wave, like alpha wave or gamma wave. You see, you observe local field potential. Behind the local field potential, you see some neurons are firing together. Yeah, firing together and form this kind of gamma oscillation. But usually not the same neuron don't really always fire in this interval. Sometimes they have to wait for 20 or 25 cycles to fire once. But some neuron may fire really with high frequency. We just talked a lot about this heterogeneity in the firing. And then this kind of oscillation is not really like electrical circuit. You create oscillation 20 hertz and it's very precise. It's a very variable actually. For example, in this experiment, you just put the visual contrast means that the stimulus, you can say amplitude of the input. When it is getting higher, your oscillation frequency become higher. So this oscillation frequency is a very soft. And how this largest like high frequency oscillation can be consistent with this like low frequency firing of a single neuron. I think this is another kind of theoretical breakthrough to show if you have a inhibitory dominant like a neuron, for strong inhibitory coupling mutually and by external driving, then you can have this model of gamma oscillation, and then the neuron spike can be periodic, but with much lower rate, like 20 times. And then we also, when we talk about oscillation and avalanche, earlier work already observed this type of coexistence of avalanche to be locked to certain phase of the oscillation, right? Yeah, coexistence. And now, so far I talk about maybe like kind of a spontaneous activity. So, but response to the external signal. Very important feature of a neural response is a reduction of the child-to-child variability. So here, what the people measure is called a variance across different child. The same system, you give the stimulation twice, many times, and then you measure cross-child is the variability. Before the signal come, the variance is high, and the meaning like a voltage is not high, but the variance is very high. But when signal come, this meaning voltage is higher, but the variance become much smaller. Yeah. So this means your response become reliable, and this can also be seen in the firing rate. And this is the phonon factor also means that the variance across different child become reduced. Yeah, reduced. And this can be easily seen from EEG, like from EEG. Before the stimulus onset, our EEG measure is highly variable, but after the stimulus onset, when the signal coming into our brain about 100 milliseconds, then you will see this much smaller like a variance cross child. And this can also be seen in the MRI data. So earlier in the theoretically, people say that maybe we can consider this kind of understanding from chaos suppression. Because in the resting state, the system in a chaotic state, when signal come, you have a transition to periodic and then become more regular, right? More reliable. Or this concept of a multi-attractor. You have a kind of multi-stability, and the system is wandering, so you have a strong variability. But if your task select one of these state, then your variance becomes smaller, right? And the other consideration may be under the strong input, this kind of EI balance network, with background noise, the variance become smaller. Actually, our model actually follow this kind of a local homogeneous model follow this kind of states. But I think if you have a heterogeneous like a modular network, you could have this type of states, right? Now, so in our brain, we always have this kind of the same coin, two sides. One is a variable, the other one reliable, right? So we talk about like, I think the term may be relevant to you is this representation. So the animal was running, and I think I don't remember this is a place cell or it's a grid cell. I mean place cell maybe like representing your position like this. But after a few days, not the same group of neurons is representing your position, although you just still run the same position, right? So that is called the representation drift. And but if you use these kind of different data to decode your behavior, it's always very successful. Behavior is stable. So here people found that, for example, visual MRI, and you found the pattern is already changed, but the decoding ability is still very stable. Yeah, across different trial. So we came recently this question. From one side, you see this avalanche we see is very sensitive to perturbation, but how you can also realize this reliable kind of a reliability, for example, here in the representation. Inside seems also dynamic. How these things could be in principle unified from a dynamical circuit. So what I put together is that you see many features of neuron dynamic in the spontaneous and in the evoked state, like avalanche, noisy spikes, and oscillation in different frequency. And you maintain this avalanche in the presence of external stimuli and reduction of child-child variability, change of oscillation, and so on. So whether these typically in the neuroscience experiment, they observe this from different experiments, different size, different situation. I thought those may be different measure of the same, not exactly the same system, the same property of the neuron system from different angle or perspective, whether we can have some kind of a unified modeling to unify these features as the common property of the neural circuit. And if so, whether those dynamical features realize this kind of cost efficient like organization. Those are the things I come to talk in the next minutes. So now I come to this model, like Li Dong or several of you already used this model. It's not our model, but earlier this model was created to explain gamma oscillation. Basically, it's a local circuit model. You have 80% of excitatory population, 20% of inhibitory, coupled like with this kind of a density. Since it is a local circuit, you receive some external random Poisson background input from the other subcortical or the other cortical network, right? And then this parameter is can be determined roughly biologically. So what I'm talking about, I think this model I here consider like the neurotransmitter, you have a faster AMPA, and then the slow GABA inhibitory. Then this is more like a sensory cortex, I would say, sensory cortex. So then this model we found that in the sensory cortex can integrate this multi-level of neural activity. So this model captured the two important features, but in a very generic way. One is this EI balance. Yeah, this EI balance really is from this parameter. For example, here you activate this inhibitory population, like this inhibitory population come back to deactivate the excitatory population. So if you kind of tune this parameter, you see there's a larger parameter regime. The firing rate is about 1 or 2 hertz. This is called balanced regime. Yeah. And then we found that even in the balanced regime, the dynamic can still depending on this synaptic decay time. Yeah, I should go by the synaptic decay time. This time, the excitatory population, the decay time is about a few milliseconds, 4 or 5. Inhibitory synapses like decay a bit slower, GABA 10 milliseconds, like that. And then we found that if we put this parameter into our model as a control parameter, if these two parameters are both larger, slow, then what you observe is really the asynchronous state. The spiking of the neuron looks like, if you measure, there's no correlation actually, and then it is EI balanced. The current, the total current coming into a selected neuron is almost 0, but sometimes it is imbalanced temporarily, and then this neuron can produce like a few spikes, a burst. Now, if I make this excitatory synapse faster, inhibitory slower, like in the biological case, now you observe very interesting self-organization of this oscillation. Because my background is just random input, Poisson, but the circuit start to oscillate. The current is still balanced, But you see, sometimes there's a little window, the excitation start first, and then excitation start first, inhibition will come a little later. So the difference is positive, then this neuron got enough current and generate one spike. But very irregular, very irregular. Although irregular, but you generate this oscillation. During each of the oscillation, some neuron join this oscillation, right? But a single neuron is spiking is very irregular. About every 20 cycles, one neuron may spike once randomly. Yeah. But if you now make this time difference larger, the excitation, excitatory synapses is very fast, inhibitory synapses is slow. Then this time window here becomes so large that this excitation has enough time to spread in the whole network. And then every neuron becomes excited. It's like the fire goes through to burn everything. And then the inhibition will come, right? And then you have strong oscillation and very periodic and yeah. So what we did, we found in this work is that in this pyramid regime, when the excitation becomes faster, inhibition becomes slower, we have a transition, seems a transition from asynchronous state to synchronous state. And in between here, transition, if you look at a single neuron, this CV is very close to 1, means very irregular. And but the oscillation is gamma. If you measure this avalanche, is the power law. Actually, this avalanche distance from the power law distribution is minimized here in this regime. And then we have a transition from asynchronous to synchronous. So this is a kind of a transition state that we see that we can unify the irregular spiking of the single neuron, but you have a gamma oscillation, you have this critical avalanche. Actually, in neuroscience, when people see irregular spiking, they immediately go to spike like a rate coding and think like believe there's no correlation. But here we found this model can show at this completely irregular spiking temporally, but spatially they have a little correlation, and that correlation can generate oscillation. Already oscillation. It's not simply firing rate. I maybe should really speed up a bit. So what we found is EI balanced network. If you have this time difference in the EI loop and produce this little gap, little lag, allow a neuron to spike like irregularly, but many neurons can join that gap and generate this avalanche, right? So this is on the kind of picture. And then this is the work we published in 2017. Was a postdoc sitting next to Li Dong and Dongping, and when Li Dong was there. And then after a few years, and well, we stop and don't find student. Then a student come from mathematics background, Liang, Junhao. He came and found this topic interesting and then pick up again, and he worked out this theoretical part, meaning field to describe the average voltage of the excitatory population and this conductancy of the excitatory or inhibitory population. And then we get a meaning field equation of this model, of this model. And he continued to build this meaning field. You see, from like 10,000 neuron, macroscopic, but you can go to macroscopic of this mini field, and it's just a few variables, right? And now you have very good correspondence when we change a parameter like this decay time of the inhibitory neuron, and then from the mini field model, this fixed point of the mini field, the fixed firing rate is like a few hertz, right? Will become unstable because the eigenvalue of this fixed point from negative to positive. But the eigenvalue is complex. The complex imaginary part, the inverse of the imaginary part is the oscillation frequency. So this eigenvalue can give you the prediction of the oscillation frequency very nicely. And also this transition point, when you increase the coupling, the transition point, the oscillation emerge, so you start to have coherence. But if you go back to macroscopic, and then you also see the correlation increase. This model can also explain this irregular spiking, because for a model, this is the like here is a maybe low. Do you have a point? Maybe I could use maybe no battery. Yeah. So this figure shows you that the frequency, the firing rate relative to the frequency, oscillation frequency, and firing rate, both you can get from the equation. It's like a 1/20. Yeah, 1/20 means 20 cycles as the neuron will spike once. And if you measure the CV, it's still close to 1. So this means very irregular spiking. Yeah, very irregular spiking. So this model can have a correspondence between like a neural avalanche, if you measure, and then the bifurcation point about 3 there. At that point, this neural avalanche has the power law distribution because the distance from a power law is minimized. So we have a model that really can describe from this microscopic like a neuron spike and this neuron population kind of correspondence. And we found that at the critical state, this exponent is not this standard value, but this relationship, this critical relationship is preserved. When you put a different input, you get a different exponent. Yeah, but this relationship here is preserved. Yeah, so this model basically found a kind of a unification of a different dynamical property in the and thank you. Yeah, in the literature we talk about asynchronous state. In our model is just much below the bifurcation point. Is actually the fixed point is stable. Yeah. In the mini field, it means the firing rate is constant, and then it is asynchronous state. And then if you come to this kind of sparse sequencing, that firing rate is high and the correlate the spiking of the neuron low rate but periodic. This is above the bifurcation point. But below, close to bifurcation point here in the finite system, this is a critical state. This is what we typically observe in the critical state. The neuron spike, you have this kind of avalanche, but not completely periodic, and that's the state. And you also, this model can have such very irregular, very periodic and slow oscillation like that. This is the model. Yeah. So in this work we publish here, we'll also go back to some culture data to look at the up state of the culture, because the culture is different from a brain. After you put the culture in vitro for a period of time, they start to build this up and down state. Down state is too sparse, the spike. But the up state seems a lot of spike, but if you do the analysis, is a power law, avalanche. But it's irregular. The spiking is irregular. CV is close to 1, but this kind of avalanche we see in this data, we have like 20 different samples are almost like avalanche. Yeah. So now so far I talk about like ongoing spontaneous activity. So what happened if we put additional external input in the evoked state? So here I have a background so far. I put some external input, a kind of transient input like this. I have some transient input put it into the model. Initially, the input is strong. And if you think like a cortex, and initially like a visual pathway coming in, the signal will have adaptation. And after a while, the input to this circuit will go down to a kind of smaller level. And then this model, even just in the background state, when I change this background input as a background rate, you see for different background rate, the critical state is very stable actually. It's still in the parameter space, here is still critical state for different input. I will come back to this thing. So in the input states, or at least different input, background input, and then we can see that this circuit, different size or different input, all display this kind of avalanche or power law property. But even this so-called avalanche, you can use like a scaling function to to scale them. Yeah. So oh yeah. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. Very nice. So this is a kind of scaling, but just to show that it's truly critical state. Now, this model can recover the experimental observation is a here resting state. And then when this transient input come, and you drive the system temporarily away from the power law, and then afterwards you come back to the power law. Yeah, like in this experiment you found similar to this one. But this experiment published in Nature Physics, in order to explain this, they have to put this short-term plasticity in their model, which I emphasize that in our model, we don't have plasticity. I don't know. It's just EI balance, because this E and I balance, as you see experimental observation, is that the current, excitatory current, inhibitory current, they both enlarge, but the balance is maintained. The balance is maintained there. And then very interesting is that the model is highly nonlinear, right? When we do the mini field, it's not so easy because it's highly nonlinear, but the performance is very linear. It's like a traditional EI balance model. The firing rate is linearly proportional to the input. Yeah. Now, if we look at the mini field model, I go to this eigenvalue. Remember this real part of the eigenvalue. If I change a parameter tau, I go from negative to positive value. So this means you have a bifurcation, yeah, critical state. So that is the parameter I showed you before, the slides above, yeah, a few slides above there. So you have this kind of a bifurcation point. Yeah, here, this bifurcation with this parameter. But if we go back to look at how this parameter external input as a parameter, whether you can induce bifurcation or not. We found that this model is very interesting. When you increase the external input, you don't change the sign of this eigenvalue. You maintain the critical state. Yeah. So it is the same, like close to zero, and it's a very robust. But this is the real part of the eigenvalue, which is very stable with respect to the input. However, the imaginary part of the eigenvalue, means the oscillation frequency, is on the other hand very sensitive to the input. So you see here, I put a different like input strength, then the oscillation frequency in the gamma range, like experiment, will change from like 20 hertz to 50 or 60 hertz, like in the experiment you show with different input strength, the oscillation frequency is also getting larger and larger. So this model, such a simple model, of course, cannot produce this kind of a slow oscillation, right? It's a simple model, local circuit model. And then this oscillation sensitivity to the input is happening mainly at the critical state, because in the subcritical state you don't have an oscillation. You don't have oscillation, but in the supercritical state, your oscillation is very rigid. Actually, you don't change the frequency a lot, but at the critical state, you can see the change of the frequency is much larger, and the reason is the imaginary part of the eigenvalue. We found that close to the critical states, their change is most significant. Yeah, most significant. So this is a very amazing system that we didn't realize before, is how eigenvalue change with the parameter. One is a totally no change, real part totally no change, and the imaginary part is the most sensitive change. And that's something like you cannot capture using this usual like a Baker use phase oscillator that you cannot capture at all, right? Yeah. So that's then let me come to this child-child variability. Child-child variability, I showed you earlier experiment. This is the model. When you put some input here, your local field potential, the variance becomes smaller, and then the variance is reduced like in the EEG. But the firing rate of the single neuron increased, but the phonon factor also reduced. So you can have this observation like in the experiment, both at the neural spike level or the local field potential level. But this happens in a model only at the critical state. Because if you go to the subcritical state, you can see this like firing rate is increased, but the also variance increased. It's different from experiment. And here you don't see much change of this mini field. If you go to the supercritical state, it's already oscillatory, then you also don't observe this kind of reduced variance in the spiking. This mini field is reduced slightly because you still have this strong oscillation, which is not like in the real data. So only at the critical state, you kind of recover this feature of reliability in the in the model. So at that time, we published this paper in PLOS computational biology. We use this so-called noise approximation, linear noise approximation. You compute the covariance of this neural oscillation, and as a function of the background like a B noise, and then you can see this variance. I just mentioned that when you input the external input, you don't change the eigenvalue, the real part, but you change oscillation frequency, right? You also change this variance of the noise fluctuation, make the variance smaller and smaller, and especially close to the critical state. This variance change is most sensitive. Yeah, it's most sensitive. Like in the critical state, your change of the variance with the input is the most sensitive. Yeah, and then you also have this change in the macroscopic way inside. Is there's some bifurcation. I think I will not talk too much. And so then when we published this work, we thought what happened inside. Why you have this reduced variability? Looks like in the population level. What is inside for this macroscopic level? Then I have a PhD student, and we come to discover I use this term called reliable criticality. Because criticality in the beginning we said is a sensitive or variable, right? Because in all this like a measure of this branching model or disease spreading explaining the neural avalanche, it is demonstrate that it is a maximal sensitivity at the critical state. But if that model you give this neural circuit the same signal repeat, you never repeat the outcome because it is a random network, right? A random branching. But in this model, this is the same model, just written in this way. We can also put this model at the critical state, right? At the critical state, you have a so nice power law, and this is transition to the critical state. Now, at the critical state, if you put some perturbation to this model and measure the response, it is a maximal. But if you give the same signal, repeat many trials to see whether they are similar across different trials, and then the variance here at the critical state is minimized. That's very kind of striking, because you would imagine that the sensitivity is kind of intuitively contradictory to this reliability, right? Because this is exactly people usually think in the branching model, it's disease grading. So you see the maximal sensitivity here, also cross-trial least variability is also maximal. So that means a model like a physicist uses this branching model to understand like a neural avalanche. It's not enough. But our model seems to capture the reality. We know we can detect the same signal reliably, but we are also sensitive to the environment, right? So biological system realize that, but the branching model cannot explain that. Now this model can explain. Now we have a maximal sensitivity and a maximal reliability at the critical state at the same time. And then branching model, no, just sensitivity and variability, and not reliable. So we ask what kind of use of this possible usefulness of this kind of reliable criticality. We ask the circuit to do a little task. I give the circuit to sequence of the input, and in the model is basically just Poisson sequence. But I can, when I consider this as a signal, I can repeat. Yeah, I repeat. When I repeat the signal, the internal state of the circuit may be different, or initial condition is different, or I add some background noise. Then I have a signal A, signal B, and then I ask this one neuron sit here to look at this activity from this circuit with this input. Then I want to ask this neuron to report. When I give signal A, this neuron will fire. Signal B, no, never. And then that's the task asking them to do, ask this neuron to do. Then you can change, with machine learning, I change this weight. I change this readout weight. And then you can see at signal A, at a certain time, this neuron will fire a spike, alarm, signal A. Then if signal B, all the time silent. Now, what we found striking is that for different model at different, like close to the criticality, the performance is the best. At the critical state, and the system can discriminate these two external signal, right? And the best performance at that time. Why? We found that when this neuron produce this report, before that, when I have target signal A, then this circuit produce a large avalanche. Just before the neuron report, there is a large avalanche. Many neurons spike together. Then this neuron will give a strong drive to this readout neuron, and readout neuron will generate a spike. And then the long target signal, another signal, also generates spike like avalanche. But this avalanche don't give this neuron strong enough drive. The weight is not strong after learning. Actually here, the weight of this target signal is like here, much larger. And then the readout weight of this long target signal, it is close to like average is 0. So therefore, when signal B come long target, this readout neuron didn't get much information from the circuit. But if a signal A, you have an avalanche, this avalanche is special, and they give this neuron a strong input. So this is many different trials you can see, therefore accuracy is very high because always separate, this weight is separate. So we found that the avalanche is not just a signature of this scale-free power law, but it's really the presentation of the signal, external signal for the neural representation. And it is reliable because when we repeat, why this accuracy is so high? Because whenever I give this signal A, I always produce a large avalanche. So this is a different trial. When I see avalanche, for example, larger than 50 neuron, I put a dot in that trial. You see every trial produce a large avalanche at the same time because the external signal is the same, right? And then you may wonder whether this avalanche repetitive exactly from the same group of neuron. But then we found it's not. We look at different trial, whether a neuron fire or not. And we found that some neuron, you see, the frequency of firing come to 100%, only a few. Means some small fraction, about a few fraction of the neuron here, every time fire when the signal come, external signal come. But most of the neuron actually, with probability like coming from a high to low, only join some of the trials. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. Yeah, so this is interesting to say this kind of variability and reliability. You have some neuron seems as a core fairly reliable, but then the others not every time join this. But then every time you will see there's a large enough avalanche. Yeah, you still need those people. It's like I think a project outside. You always have some work every day come and be very precise, and then the other colleague may come today or tomorrow, but every day you have a larger number of people working on the project, something like this. Very interesting, I think, that you observe. So this is a kind of internal property of the circuit. With the target signal, this is at this moment you have a readout. And then, but the other time you also see many avalanche, they repeat. Even for non-target signal, just read out, no response in the readout. But inside the circuit, you also see some repeating of the large avalanche. And even sometimes this avalanche, you see the time jet is very small, means it's very reliable. Every child at that time, you see a large avalanche. Yeah. But the inside, only a small portion of them is reliable. So we go deeper to look at why this avalanche can give the readout, just because those avalanche linking to the readout neuron, the weight is high. Yeah, the weight is high. Really, this avalanche give larger push to the signal to the readout neuron. And then we also compare like a avalanche of this different child, the same avalanche, and how they are similar, or this avalanche and this avalanche, different avalanche. Then we found that different avalanche, the distance is larger. The same time, this avalanche, they are more similar. And the distance between these two is maximized in the critical state. In the critical state, you can generate the same avalanche is very reliable, but also most different from the other avalanches, right? Yeah, so this is a very interesting property of this. So the consequence of this one is that we will have this so-called optimal neuron representation. So here is the bifurcation parameter. When you increase the avalanche size getting larger and larger, in a critical state is something like avalanche size in a medium. So this is like a temporal reliability, means whether you have avalanche happening at the exactly right time, or spatial reliability, the same avalanche, whether it is same group of neuron or different. We found that when you come to this critical state, it's already coming to the maximal, although the avalanche size is not so big. Now, that gives you this kind of a picture. Each dot is the avalanche in the PC dimension I reduced. It's hundreds of neurons. Now reduced to 3 dimensions. When you have the same input, you generate the same neuron representation, the same color. But if you go to another input, you go to another cluster. If you have another input, you go to another cluster. The same input, if you repeat, the same reliable response. But they are so nicely separated, means I can include many different signals. But in the supercritical state, it's all mixed together because the avalanche is too large. Whenever you have signal, you already activate too many neurons, right? Too many neurons, you cannot separate. So if you go to measure the so-called capacity, whether you can separate these clusters, you see the critical state is working much better. You can use, earlier I said 1 neuron, you can use like more neuron to read out. and the readout dimension can be small, or you can, with the same network, you can put more different signal type and your error is small for the critical state. So really, because you activate the small number of neurons, medium size, like here, you see for different size of the avalanche, the reliability is different. For very small avalanche, subcritical, they are not reliable. Reliability is very low. But for the very large avalanche, for the supercritical state, the reliability is actually not so high. It's the critical state, although the avalanche size is not big, but the reliability is very high. So you can, the same population, you can divide them into many working groups. They are very reliable. Yeah, and then they can work on different things, and then they can be recruited reliably. That's the picture from this model, like our recent work. So why is that? We found that this is perhaps related to Lidong, what we discussed, is while those reliable neuron has a reliable neuron respond to the signal, we found that their number of inhibitory coupling is small, and that their firing rate is high. And then most of all the neuron firing rate is low. And this separation of high firing rate or low firing rate, this kind of a separation is maximized at the critical states. At the critical states. So at the critical state, you allow some neuron to fire higher, much higher than the other. But largely, most of them are high, firing rate is low. So earlier I said I have a population model is two population. Now I have to go into detail. The neuron with different number of inhibitory coupling have different firing rate. So I have a population mini field depending on, I think, this number of inhibitory connection. When the inhibitory connection here is small, firing rate is high. And then when the number of inhibitory connection is higher, your firing rate is low. Your firing rate is low. And then this model can fit to the data from simulation, can predict this kind of maximal heterogeneity at this critical state. So this is an earlier version. In the revised version, the reviewer asked us to compare. For example, we homogenize this inhibitory connection for all the neurons. Then we found that this so-called reliable avalanche is almost gone. Very difficult to find. Reliability is much lower. But if you homogenize the excitatory population, degree doesn't matter. So inhibitory connection is so important in this small model, determining your heterogeneity, determining your reliability. And then inside your circuit, you do not be influenced too much by the internal dynamic. Therefore, you will be influenced by external signal, become reliable. That's a kind of understanding. So just recently, this work to show that you can have a coexistence of a maximal sensitivity and maximal reliability. The avalanche is not just a kind of biomarker of criticality. It is really directly contributed to the neuron representation. It's really the signal itself. And then the structural heterogeneity seems, after this kind of striking property, then seems can be easily realized. It's not difficult to realize. Yeah, very genetic. So basically, this slide is summarizing the title. We send this paper on the revised version to PRL. Is we see critical avalanche reconcile this sensitivity and reliability to achieve this kind of optimal neuron representation. But this is a continuation of this earlier work, right? So if it's already very long, putting together, basically we have a model. The model is not very detailed. It's a very generic local circuit model, random connection, EI balance, just capture these a few features. I can unify many property of irregular spiking, weak correlation, and scale-free avalanche, and gamma oscillation in local field potential, and you have this kind of reliable avalanche and suppression of child-child variability for known factor, and then also here you see frequency changes with input, and so many of these features are recovered from just a single model. So that's why our group are trying to use this model further to do like large scale modeling, information processing, like memory learning, like Lidong's interest, and make prediction with neural modulation strategy and AI. Yeah, so maybe I quickly go through that. Shall we stop here or
if you can do it in 5 minutes?
Yeah, yeah. So then maybe I just very quickly this part about the cost efficiency. Earlier in this 1917 work, we basically measure the neural representation capacity divided by the energy, and we found that this this regime I mentioned, you can unify different dynamic in this parameter space. I unify this irregular spiking, avalanche, and so on. This is the place that you can have a maximal energy efficiency, but the firing rate is minimized. Yeah, so this is the cost efficiency. And then I think I can skip the details. This is the earlier work. I think Klaus, you handled our paper. This I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But later we had this concept that this wiring, economical architecture, and the dynamic, they should work together. So this is a demonstration using such a simple concept that the neuron form this kind of column in a two-dimensional space. But if your connection is not constrained by the space, it's just a topologically a random network, spatially the neuron located there. Then in this case, of course, the wiring cost is so strong. Wiring length is very, not only wiring. You randomize this network, the firing rate will go to 20 Hertz. Irregular spiking like this, irregular spiking, but the firing rate is high. So it's very costly. Now, if I put the connection is like distance dependent, like depending on your distance, or I put the connection within this module, then you make a modular network. The wiring cost is decaying by orders of magnitude. The firing rate is also coming down, but the dynamic will move into such critical state when I do in this way. Then this critical state, the firing rate is 1 or 2 Hertz, compared to here is 10 times less, and the wiring cost is much less. But the dynamic is useful because if I put a little perturbation, I can generate this larger response. In this random network with a lot of firing, I already put it in, but no use, useless. Because if I put the activation, I just activated those a few neurons and then it's gone, cannot really propagate out. So some theory behind this, and because when you have a local dense connection, you have a topological common neighbors, then that can create a correlation in the spiking. Once you have a little correlation, then the same input can generate much higher spike rate, or the network is self-organized in a much lower rate and can self-sustain. Because when you have a correlation, a neuron receiving correlated spike will be much easier to spike, even the overall firing rate is much smaller, right? So, and then you have a mini field can explain all this change with the density. Your eigenvalue move closer to 0, closer to the critical state. So let's just yeah. So I think I can skip this part. Use this model for studying why, for example, quickly the gamma oscillation during the learning process, gamma oscillation emerges. Then once gamma is there, then this oscillation will recruit the neuron to spike within millisecond precession. And then the plasticity make the connection stronger and stronger. Then you can encode the engram very quickly through gamma oscillation into this model. So that's it. And then another work is recently with experimental group. They found that this kind of how you call this kind of protein enzyme. Yeah. If you lock out, then you will you will destroy the excitatory to inhibitory synapses like plasticity. And then the animal cannot remember this fair memory overnight, cannot consolidate. And then when we meet and they ask us to do the modeling, because the excitatory plasticity is still there, but the excitatory to inhibitory synapse plasticity is gone. And then our model produces a two-layer. First layer have a memory, then whether the memory can be consolidated to the hippocampus and circuit. So this plasticity is gone. Then we found that the circuit, this part become overexcited. So here they don't. This is a plastic rule, if you study learning, then this is a quantum is using in these three papers. And then basically what we found is that this circuit, if it's abnormal, become overexcited. Whatever the memory in the first layer, you always activate the same group of neuron. Of course, you cannot consolidate. Now, experimentally, when we found this, and then they go to the experiment and they confirm this overexcitation. And then modeling, we said how we can bring the circuit back to the EI balance. Then we activate the inhibitory neuron, PV cell. With this, you also work on the gamma. We have a theta, a spike, a square wave, and another square wave here. Then in between, we insert a gamma. The interval here is gamma, and here is theta. We have gamma and theta like a coupled. We found that a very interesting thing is that you add one or two of these inside, you get the best EI balance, and then the memory will be recovered. If you have a theta, you cannot rebalance. If you have a gamma exchange, you should balance, create a strong inhibition, but there's a strong rebound. So after inhibition, you get an even stronger excitation and then become resilient with this gamma. So basically, we found that you need this kind of input. You can get the best. You can get the best like EI balance, and then the animal can recover. So they did experiment. Indeed, put this kind of 40 hertz and 8 hertz like a combination to stimulate the animal, and then they can find out that they can make an animal normal in performance. That's the work we published. And then another recent simulation is simulating AD. The same model, you reduce the connectivity. If the normal case, you can have like a memory, you have this sustained engram activation, persistent activity, and but if you connection is gone, lost, then you move into some burst activity, but the engram cannot be activated. So you have the memory there, but you cannot retrieve the memory because your dynamic is not synchronized enough. And then we also found that if you now put some slow like a gamma 40 hertz, you can best recover the memory, and you can best recover the memory with like 40 or 50 hertz of stimulation. But if this model, if you want to learn a new memory, then it's hard because the new memory will mix with the old engram and then become mixed, and that's all. So I come to the end, and so the summary is seems from this model work, say neural circuit can really realize this kind of energy constraint of a few hertz with local dense connection to save wiring cost, but at the same time you can satisfy this efficient processing through avalanche. So in between, the spiking of the neuron is irregular, but you can have this avalanche cluster, you have oscillation. So the dynamical mechanism is you need a balance, and the locally dense network, you need a topological correlation. And this synaptic kinetics means I have EI loop, have a delay, and that can give you this dynamical process, and less can be more. So that's the kind of publication, and currently we are trying to go to use this model because this model captures so many dynamical features. I think this is a good model to build larger scale dynamic. For example, I mentioned to Klaus, trying to use this model to detect the combination of brain area or brain link sensitive for neural modulation. Yeah, and then we are trying to understand this kind of neural representation, including the plasticity in the model. Actually, quantum already include this for the work, but we want to put it into this kind of framework. So, and all the things about this machine learning, why neuron can do this computing with so little cost. That's all. Thank you.